Welcome to another PureRead audiobook. It's wonderful to have you with us. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple and easy way ensures we can continue adding more delightful audiobooks for your listening enjoyment. The following story is copyrighted PureRead Limited, the home of books you can trust. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. The Bishop's Daughter, an Amish romance by Grace Given. Chapter 1. The Bishop's Daughter. Rebekah threw her hands up toward the deep blue sky above her. The wind gently blew against her skirt, and several strands of light brown hair escaped from beneath her cap. Her thoughts took her far from the sing that was going on in the Byler barn a mile and a half away. Sure that Jacob Byler searched once again for her at the gathering, she dismissed those notions. Without a doubt, both Jacob and Eli Stauffer pursued her, but Rebekah had little interest in finding an Amish man to settle down with. She had plans of her own. It would prove harder to accomplish her dreams since she was the only daughter of the Amish community's bishop. She sat down on the soft grass and put a straw in her mouth. Rolling it around with her tongue, she thought about her talents. She had one that she was starkly aware of, and that was expertise in sewing. Often she looked at the 3 dresses she owned and imagined altering them to look more interesting. The reality of the situation told her that this was something even Rebekah Stoltzfus would not dare do. She was taught to live with humility, but did not always adhere to that virtue, especially in her daydreams. She sat up and listened to the clip-clop sounds of a horse pulling a buggy. The open field gave her no place to hide, and so she remained on the grass. "There you are, Rebekah," said Eli. "I have been looking all over for you." Rebekah attempted a genuine smile. His blue eyes matched the sky, and without a doubt, he was a handsome man. At age 19, he had been baptized and now farmed with his father and brothers on his parents' farm. He was settled into the life of the Amish culture. That was the problem, thought Rebekah. He was settled. How boring! Was there not a world of interesting possibilities to explore? "Good afternoon, Eli. Is the sing over already?" Eli laughed softly. "You and I know it will not end until later tonight. What are you doing way out here by yourself?" "I must have time to think. Eli, the week is filled with chores and obligations. Sunday afternoons provide the only time for myself." Eli Stauffer and Rebekah Stoltzfus had grown up together. The Stauffers' farm joined the parsonage. Rebekah possessed a strong spirit, which at times proved very difficult for her. She was the only daughter of Bishop Daniel and Clara Stoltzfus. She had one brother engaged to be married and one ready to experience his Rumspringa out in the world. Her eldest brother James was married. Rebekah was often reminded of her position in the Amish community as the bishop's daughter. Daniel admonished her to carry herself as a young lady who would become a wife someday. "You must set an example, Rebekah, to all the young girls in the community." Eli was well aware of Rebekah's spirit, so opposite to his. He was a man with purpose, and that was to marry his childhood friend and the love of his life. She rejuvenated him with her spirit, and though he was mild-mannered and focused on his future within the Amish community, sometimes he secretly envied the way Rebekah went her own way. Her brothers tried to tone her down, especially Samuel, who was 21. He was 2 years older than his sister and was most protective of her. Eli looked into Rebekah's amber eyes that shone when she looked into the sunlight. He heard her words and was shocked that the woman he wanted to marry felt she must have time for herself. He was raised in a large family of 3 boys and 2 sisters. No one used spare time for selfish needs of their own. Precious free time naturally drew them to socialize with others, or more importantly, to assist a neighbor or a friend in need. "I am sure there is someone who would enjoy your company," said Eli. "I am one of those people, Rebekah. Do you have any feelings for me at all?" "I like you very much, Eli. I know you want more from me than that." "I am not ready to marry and start a family. I have other ideas for now." Eli questioned her on what she meant. Rebekah evaded his questions. The handsome man talking with her had a personality that drew women to him. Several stood in the background, waiting for Eli to give up on Rebekah and turn to one of them. Memories of the day when they were both 10 years old swiftly crossed her mind. That was the day Eli told her he planned to marry her. She agreed, but that was childhood, and this was now. "Eli, I want to talk about my dreams, but I know few would understand my reasons for shunning marriage." The expression on his face alarmed her. "I don't mean that I will never marry. I mean, I am not ready to take that step right now." The smile returned to Eli's face. "I will be patient, Rebekah. I am drawn to you, and that is something I cannot help." His face brightened. "Will you consider a buggy ride with me now?" Rebekah reluctantly stood up and mustered what she hoped was another genuine smile. Eli took her arm and assisted her up to the buckboard. He had prepared a light blanket folded over several times for her to sit on. A light shiver went through Rebekah when Eli touched her arm. She shook the feeling off and decided to simply enjoy the ride. One day she would tell Eli what she wanted in life. The next morning, Rebekah awoke to a sunny day. She heard her parents getting up, and the footsteps on the stairs of her 2 brothers, Samuel and Ezekiel. She hurried and got ready for her day. Her mother was already in the kitchen by the time she came downstairs. She assisted with preparing a hearty breakfast for the family. Her father and brothers had early morning chores to do first. Clara Stoltzfus decided against mentioning seeing her daughter take a buggy ride with Eli Stauffer the evening before. She had discovered that when a suitor was mentioned to Rebekah, she closed herself off from her parents. Many times, Clara had to restrain her bishop husband from pushing their daughter. Clara did not realize a frown formed on her forehead. Rebekah's idea of not marrying worried her mother. Clara and Daniel wanted Rebekah to marry and start a family. But first of all, Rebekah must consent to baptism. Daniel was most concerned about that because until Rebekah was baptized, she could not marry. Claire had to admit her daughter was very good with a needle. She knew how to cook and do necessary chores to allow a family to run smoothly. She possessed the necessary skills to have a family and home of her own. Unknown to Clara and Daniel, they had no idea what their daughter planned for herself. Clara quickly prayed silently for her family. Rebekah noticed her mother was quieter than usual this morning. "After breakfast, I will begin the laundry," she said. Her mother did not answer until Rebekah touched her arm to get her attention. "You are far away this morning, ma'am," she said. "Do you have a concern?" Clara laughed and said, "I am gut. My Dutta, we had better get this breakfast on. I hear your date and brooders on the way now." After a prayer led by her father, the family enjoyed the early meal of the day. Daniel and Clara talked of tasks ahead, but no one mentioned Ezekiel's imminent interest. He was 3 years younger than Rebekah, and at age 16, he was ready to begin his Rumspringa. Their father did not like the idea of his son going out into the world to experience different things. He did not understand why it was necessary, but he followed the tradition that allowed young people to do this. He prayed his son would follow his running around time, the way his eldest son, James, had done. James lasted 1 week among the Englishers and came back to court his future wife, Ellen. He settled into the Amish way of life, and now Ellen was preparing to give birth to their second child. When the boys returned to the barn to complete chores, Daniel held back. Rebekah realized something was going on when both her parents sat back down at the table. "Join us, Rebekah," said her father. "Your mom and I must speak with you." Rebekah knew what the conversation would be about. She obeyed and sat down. Her eyes rested on the now empty plates around the table. She waited for the bishop to speak. "You are 19, Rebekah. It is time for you to be baptized and settle into marriage. We know that Eli Stauffer wants to court you and eventually marry you. Eli is an upstanding Amish man and will be a gut husband for you. He will show you respect and will be a gut husband for you. He will show you respect and will be a gut father when the time comes." Rebekah did not answer. Silence filled the room, and only the soft simmering of water heating for laundry day could be heard. Her father continued, "If you do not feel drawn to Eli, then surely there are young men to pick from at the sings and other events for young people." He said, "Jacob Byler seems interested in you." When Rebekah did not answer, her father's demeanor changed to a sterner look. "It will soon be too late for you to marry anyone, Rebekah. You are our only doctor, and we want you to find someone soon. You are not getting any younger, and it is time for you to put away the things of childhood and teen years. You must look toward your future." Bishop Stoltzfus stood up. The women did the same and began to clear the table. Tears stung Rebekah's eyes. She must find the courage to discuss her plans with her parents very soon. She had no doubt her father would go to great lengths to find a husband for her. After all, he was the bishop, and the bishop's daughter was expected to marry at least by age 19. Rebekah was aware of what her father thought because she overheard him tell her mother this. Rebekah and her mother scrubbed the family's laundry and hung the articles on the clotheslines to dry. The morning passed quickly enough. Rebekah reached for the last towel to hang. "It is a gut day for drying," said her mother. "I will go inside and start dinner now. We are almost finished." "I will finish this and come in to help you, ma'am," said Rebekah. It was time for her to tell her mother about setting up a sewing shop. Perhaps her mother could prepare her father before she spoke to him as well. Back in the kitchen, Rebekah brought up the subject of her dreams to her mother. Clara heard her through and then told her what she and Daniel thought should happen first. "I am not telling you to never have your own shop. In the future, it will be a good idea and a great help to add to the income of your own family. But Rebekah, it takes money to start a business of your own, and you do not have it. Your dad will not help you financially in this case. He will be totally against this idea." Clara paused. "My doctor, you must seriously consider baptism before anything else in your life." "I know, ma'am, but I am not ready to take that step." "Until you are, there will be no real purpose made known to you in your life." Her mother appeared to be set in her assumptions, and Rebekah let the matter drop. As Rebekah worked, she thought of her childhood. She had loved going to church services and learning about the power of prayer. She had not taken prayer seriously enough as of late. She knew her mother was right about steps to take in her life. She silently prayed God would lead her to his plan for her. Once more, she felt a once-lost peace fill her heart. Chapter 2. Eli. Later in the afternoon, Rebekah removed clothes from the lines and brought both large baskets up to the porch. She sat down and began folding small items. Her mother joined her and they finished the task together. "I need some things from the general store, Rebekah. Do you want to take a break and run the errand for me?" Rebekah jumped at the idea. It would give her a few minutes to herself. Her mother handed her a small list of needed items. She hitched the buggy and started down the lane from their house. She passed rolling fields of alfalfa that would provide feed for animals. The beauty of the landscape caught her eye, and she thanked her God for his bounty. Thoughts turned to childhood friends. She, Nancy Yoder, Jacob Byler, and Eli Stauffer were inseparable. All four loved playing games and lived within 2 miles of one another. Jacob still held a close friendship with Eli. When a barn raising came up, they made a good pair together. One seemed to know the other in a way that was unique. They stood up for each other when necessary, and they would do anything asked by the other. This was all well known in the community. The fact that both young men loved Rebekah was also well known, except between the two men. Eli was grateful that Jacob encouraged him in his pursuit of Rebekah, and his friends stood back to allow that to happen. Rebekah felt eyes on her when she tied her horse to the rail. She brushed her skirt and picked up the basket from the buggy. She had no idea where he came from, but when she stepped up onto the wooden boards, Jacob was at her side. "Good afternoon, Rebekah," he said. He stepped back and opened the door for her. "Are you coming in, Jacob?" she asked. He stood still, holding the door open. Jacob's face flushed slightly, and he rushed in behind her. "Jay, I need a new hammer. It must be a sturdy one. My dad and I are building a chicken coop. We are going to cover it this time with strong wires to keep predators out." Rebekah vaguely recalled something about the Byler's chickens being destroyed by animals in the night. She smiled at Jacob. "That will be good. I hope it works better for you." Jacob watched her as she made her way to the right side of the store. Her slender fingers touched several different bolts of fabric. Then she stood back to look at the array of threads. Jacob could not take his eyes off of her. He felt someone bump him and turned to see Rebekah's best friend, Nancy Yoder. "Excuse me, Jacob," she said. "I didn't see you there." Her eyes fluttered in a subtle, flirtatious way, enough to cause him to feel heat creeping up his neck. He stood back and hurried to the back where tools were. He did not need a new hammer and felt a little guilty about his lie to Rebekah. He wanted to keep his eyes on her as much as possible. Now he had to purchase the hammer. When he came back to the front of the store, he saw Rebekah moving from the fabric area to the groceries. She chose a sack of cornmeal, flour, and a small bag of sugar. She and Nancy chatted as they shopped, and then Nancy left the store. Rebekah approached the counter where the Amish woman greeted her in a friendly manner. Rebekah smiled back and bent her head to pull the necessary coins from her small bag. "I will be glad to take these to your wagon for you," said Jacob. "Danke, Jacob. I see you found the right hammer." Her smile captivated him. After he placed the items in the back of the buggy, he lingered, hoping to come up with more conversational topics. "I was sure you were going to buy some of that new fabric," he said. Rebekah sighed. "I wanted it, but the new materials are always more expensive when they first arrive. I will wait until early fall and then get some of it. Did you notice the lovely colors? I especially liked the different shades of the blues." Jacob had not noticed anything except Rebekah, but he nodded. "What am I doing?" he asked himself. He knew Eli must have his chance with Rebekah. In reality, he felt sure neither man had a chance. So far, Rebekah gave no indication she wanted to marry anyone at all. In fact, both men were well aware she had not been baptized. Jacob finally ran out of words and told Rebekah he hoped to see her again soon. She smiled and told him she was sure they would. As she drove off, Rebekah thought about how lucky she was. Jacob and Eli were best friends together, and she felt very comfortable in their presence. She recalled their childhood and the games they all played together. She had enjoyed their company sometimes more than she did her own best friend, Nancy Yoder. Nancy was very pretty with blonde hair and hazel eyes. Her one goal was to find the man she loved and marry. Together they would start a family. Nancy voiced these things to Rebekah, but she did not let on that she already knew who she wanted to marry. It was not as if Rebekah would be unhappy about her choice, but Nancy knew Jacob had eyes for her friend. Nancy hoped Jacob Byler would ask to court her. If Rebekah had known this, she would have encouraged her friend to try to get Jacob more interested in her. As her horse clip-clopped along, it dawned on Rebekah she should attend the next sing and get caught up with her friends. Nancy asked her the previous Sunday if she was staying after church services. Rebekah feared if she did not attend the social events of the young people on occasion, her father would find out and she would be subjected to his admonishments even more so. Eli Stauffer made excuses to ride down the short road that led to the parsonage as much as possible. If he saw Rebekah outside, he would pull in and talk with her. He wished she would talk of serious things, specifically things that concerned a future together. He was sure she felt electricity when she sometimes accepted a buggy ride with him. He sensed this each time he took her arm to help her onto the buckboard. His goal was to entice her for rides every chance he got. Today was no exception, and he knew where to find her. Clara told him her daughter finished chores and wandered off someplace. Eli did not understand what pulled at Rebekah to be alone in the open fields. From a distance, he noted her carefree demeanor. It was as if she swayed in rhythm, with the wind that gently caused her skirt to billow softly. He paused before he approached her. When she accepted his offer of a ride this day, his heart overflowed with happiness. She felt his hand on her arm and realized the warmth emitted from Eli as she got up onto the buckboard. The day was lovely and the kind Rebekah loved. They rode along in comfortable companionship. Chapter 3. The Mystery. The next day was Saturday, and Eli finished his chores by early afternoon. His father asked him to take a horseshoe into the blacksmith's for him. He did this quickly, and then on the way home, he planned how he could persuade Rebekah to accompany him on a ride that evening. He drove into the lane that led to the parsonage. His throat caught when he saw Rebekah pulling weeds from a flower garden near the house. The sun caught strands of light brown hair that had the tendency to escape her cap. She turned and, shielding her eyes from the sun, she waved at Eli. Something about him appeared different to her. She could not put her finger on why she thought that. Instead, she stared at him, and for the first time she saw an appealing young man who was more handsome than she ever realized. His hands were strong, and when he tethered his horse to the available rail, she noted a profile that accentuated perfect facial features. For the first time in her life, Rebekah was unable to speak. She had no idea what just happened, but her heart skipped a beat or two when he took long strides toward her. At first, puzzlement crossed his face when he noticed her features. He observed a softness he had not seen before. "I see you are busy," said Eli. "I will talk while you work." Rebekah jerked back to her old self again. "That is just like you, Eli Stauffer, offering to talk while I do all the work." He laughed at her teasing and knelt down alongside her to pull weeds. This day he was happier than he had been for a long time. Without a doubt, Rebekah Stoltzfus was in love with him. He read her face easily, and he did not miss a thing. Claire brushed the kitchen curtain aside and looked out. She smiled to herself before closing the crisp, white-gauzed material. The next day brought the Sunday church services to the Stoltzfus parsonage. The families in the church rotated hosting the services every other Sunday. The in-between Sundays were a time for family and visiting neighbors. Eli anticipated the service this Sunday more than ever. He knew he was making progress in his pursuit of Rebekah and could not wait to see her again. The parsonage filled with worshipers. The women sat on one side of the room and the men opposite them across the narrow aisle. Bishop Stoltzfus quieted everyone down by starting the ritual. He announced 2 members who prepared to be baptized at the next service. Today, they would complete the final lesson. Then everyone began the first hymn. After singing many stanzas, they sat down again and gave their attention to the sermon. Eli purposely turned as if to not miss his chair and caught Rebekah looking at him. She quickly turned her head away. "I think Eli is in love with you more than a little," whispered Nancy. The pink that flooded Rebekah's face was something new to her. She switched her attention to her father's words. He knew how to begin in measured tones, reach a near crescendo before finally ending his message. As was the custom, the sermons were long. Rebekah lost her focus more than once. More hymns followed, but her mind swirled with confusion as to what was going on between her and Eli. When services were over, Rebekah and Nancy joined the other women in the kitchen and began serving food to everyone. The aromas encouraged big appetites. Everyone sat down, and Rebekah found Eli seated directly across the table from her. The boys and young men sat on one side, while the girls and young women sat opposite them. Eli had no problem carrying on a conversation with Rebekah and the others. As for Rebekah, she found herself stumbling on her words when she looked at Eli. The food was plentiful, and once the meal was finished, the women and girls cleared the tables and brought out desserts. Rebekah felt a strong desire to head for the fields as soon as possible. "I hope you are planning to stay the rest of the day," said Eli. Rebekah realized everyone looked at her. Nancy and Jacob both told her to not miss the sing this Sunday. Rebekah nodded yes. She had not been for several Sundays. The sings always followed the every other week services. Since services were at her home today, it would be hard to miss another one. First, though, she wanted time to herself. When the tables were cleared, the adults began visiting together, and the young people sat on the grass in the yard and talked together. Rebekah slipped away alone. She headed for the barn where she intended to hitch the horse to a buggy and ride far away for the afternoon. She would return around 5 for more food and stay for the sing. She talked softly to the horse and realized she was not alone in the barn when she heard a rustling sound. She turned and saw nothing. She glanced up at the loft. No strands of hay sifted down. The sound had come from behind her. "If that is you, Eli, you can come out now," she said. Silence filled the barn except for sounds of the horses snorting and shifting their feet. During services, the horses were kept in the barn rather than out in the pasture because of the heavy rainstorm the night before, which ended during the service. Her brothers would come to let them out and arrange hay bales for seating. Then the young people would gather for the rest of the night in the barn. When there was no answer to her chiding, Rebekah felt a chill run through her body. She decided to leave right away. It was unusual for her to let anything unnerve her, but something was not right. She picked up her skirts and walked quickly from the barn. "Wait, Rebekah. Where are you going in such a hurry?" asked Eli. Eli came from the yard where their friends were talking. It could not have been him in the barn. It must have been Jacob teasing me, she thought. Jacob and Nancy asked where you went. I was sure you were getting ready to escape, said Eli. Where is Jacob? Eli's face shifted downward. He is right over there with Nancy and the others, he said. Rebekah followed to where he was pointing. Eli saw something in her face that alerted him. What is wrong, Rebekah? You look scared. Did something happen to you? Eli looked past her to the barn. Nothing unusual was there, but he was sure something frightened her. He asked if one of the horses got spooked. She shook her head no. She was just about ready to tell him she was sure someone was in the barn when Ezekiel and his friends came running up. We are going to let the horses out into the pasture and get the barn ready for later, he said. They ran into the barn and Rebekah watched them to see if anyone else came from a hiding place. When that did not happen, she decided her imagination was running wild with her, but she knew she was kidding herself. If that was the case, then why was she suddenly anxious to join her friends again? Eli's face still held the look of concern. She took his arm and pulled him toward the others. We had better get back, she said. They are probably talking about us already. Eli felt relieved that Rebekah was laughing again, and he happily joined the others with her. The older members left the young ones in the middle of the afternoon. Claire was glad to see her daughter remain with her friends. When she noticed her going toward the barn, she was sure Rebekah planned to get away. Thankfully, Eli followed and brought her back. Claire and Daniel went inside and sat down. The house had grown quiet now that the young people were out in the barn. They heard singing and conversations flowing. They both dozed in their chairs until they heard voices nearing the house. Several young women began pulling food from the icebox, and they carried platters of leftovers back to the tables set up in the barn. It was evening and time to eat again. "Mem and Ded," said Rebekah. She stood in the doorway. "I have prepared plates for you." Her mother opened her eyes and smiled at her daughter. Daniel smiled and told her thank you. "I will clean up the kitchen," said Clara. "You go back out and enjoy your friends." When the bishop and his wife sat down to eat, Daniel smiled and said, "I noticed Eli and Rebekah looking at each other during the service." Clara had seen the exchanges as well. She told her husband of Eli's excuses to visit their daughter. "God is gut," said the bishop. "Eli is a gut man and devoted to our Amish way of life." "I am happy. It is time our doctor settled down." They ate a rice pudding and roast beef and listened to the happy sounds from the barn. They would be in bed long before their children came in for the night. The sing ended around 10, and Eli asked Rebekah if she would take a buggy ride with him. Rebekah loved the night sky. She was in no hurry to turn in for the night. She smiled at Eli and told him she was ready. Not long into the ride, the couple sensed something different about this outing. Rebekah leaned back and gazed into the sky that was littered with stars. She leaned closer to Eli and felt the warmth of his sturdy body. Eli looked down at her soft face. His heart nearly burst with love for her. His patience had paid off as he waited over the months for her to notice him in a way they had not shared before now. "Rebekah, do you remember what I told you when we were 10 years old?" he asked. "What was that, Eli?" she said. She wished for him to say it again. "I told you I would marry you when we were older. You acted like you did not hear me, but I know you did, because you agreed. Then you ran off with Jacob and Nancy as if hiding from me." Rebekah laughed softly. "I remember very well, but I did not take you seriously at age 10. Do you take me seriously now at age 19? She leaned closer and said yes. "Does that mean you will allow me to court you in earnest and marry me by late fall?" "I have to be baptized first," said Rebekah. She sat up straight when she realized what she said. "My parents are right. Nothing will work for me unless I am baptized first." Eli reached for her and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "The man to tell that to lives in your home. Let the bishop know you are ready for that step. Then we can announce our engagement." "I doubt we can get all of that done by late fall," said Rebekah. "I will have to take the 9 lessons for baptism first, and it is already late summer. Fall will come in 2 weeks. "I can wait for you," said Eli. He kissed her on her forehead, and heat shot through Rebekah when his lips touched her face. On the way back to the Stoltzfus house, Eli felt sure he would not sleep that night. He kissed her lightly again when he helped her down from the buggy at her house. She smiled and turned toward the back door of the house. Eli started to turn his horse around, but he could not take his eyes off Rebekah. Her next actions alerted him when she suddenly stopped in her tracks. She turned toward the barn and seemed frozen in space. He followed her gaze and saw nothing except moonlight shining on the pasture between the garden and the barn. "What is it, Rebekah?" he called softly. She shook her head and smiled weakly at him. "It is all right. I just thought I saw movement in the barn area from the corner of my eye. It must have been one of the stars shooting across the heavens. I will wait until you are safely inside. Then I will go to the barn and see if someone is out there." "No, Eli, do not go out there." "I am sure it was nothing. Danke for the lovely ride tonight. I enjoyed the sing and most of all spending time with you." He waited until she was inside the house. He watched until the snuffed lantern darkened her room. Then he swerved the horse and buggy in a large circle and looked intently at the barn. He slowly moved his eyes around the perimeter of the property. He saw nothing amiss and headed down the short lane to the main road. He remained awake and alert most of the night that was left, his eyes glued to the Stoltzfus parsonage and small acreage that joined the Stauffer farm, until his eyes grew heavy with fatigue. Chapter 4. The English. The next morning, there was a new light in Rebekah's eyes. She waited until her family was finished with breakfast. Rebekah asked her parents to wait for a few minutes before beginning the usual Monday chores. Daniel told his sons to go ahead and start mending the fence behind the barn. When the door closed, the bishop and his wife sat down and waited for their daughter to speak. "Eli and I are courting," said Rebekah. "Dad, I do want to be baptized, and I want to take the lessons as soon as possible." Daniel looked pleased, as did Clara, though both parents knew Rebekah tended to be impulsive. "Are you certain, Doctor?" asked the bishop. "This is a very serious step." "That is what you have wanted, is it not?" asked Rebekah. "Jay, it is our desire for you. I ask if this is really what you want to do." The bishop's eyes locked onto her face. "It is what I want, Dad. Eli and I desire to marry once I am baptized." Clara stood and reached for her daughter. The hug she gave her was a tight one that nearly took Rebekah's breath away. Her father bent and kissed her on her forehead. "We will start the lessons at the next service then," he said. As the weeks flew by, Rebekah realized how much she had missed time with her friends. Eli kept his eyes on her with pure love, and he was oblivious to those around him. "I have never seen anyone so in love as Eli is with Rebekah," said Nancy. Jacob agreed with her. He knew Nancy wanted him to ask to court her, but he could not bring himself to do that. He liked Nancy, but he had never felt love for her. Jacob was aware that Nancy was not the only one interested in him. Several others attempted to draw his attention when the young people gathered. Only disappointment on their part followed. Jacob accepted that Rebekah was now Eli's, and it did not diminish his faithfulness toward his best friend. He promised himself that he would always be there for both of them. Eli stayed busy helping his father and 2 brothers on the farm. It was fall harvest time, and his family looked forward to the bounty, as did the neighbors around them. One evening, when Eli's family gathered for conversation before nightly prayer, his mother picked up a piece of linen. "Look at these stitches," said Ruby. "Claire has taught her doctor well. You will marry a very good seamstress, Eli." He admired the handiwork of the small table cover. It was a gift from the Stoltzfus women last Christmas. Families in the community did not exchange gifts, but the 2 families in this case did. At least Clara Stoltzfus and Ruby Stauffer did. They had been close friends for a long time. When Eli visited in the Stoltzfus' home, he often sat with them while Rebekah bent over one sewing project or another. He knew she loved doing this. He looked at his 2 younger sisters when his mother spoke to them. "Mary, maybe Rebekah will show you some hints to help you," said Ruby. Her 12-year-old daughter liked to sew. She avidly learned knitting and had made several lap robes for the buggy. Her eyes lit up now when her mother mentioned this. "Do you think she will do that?" she asked. Her eyes moved to her brothers. "All you have to do is ask her," he said. Mary was not an outgoing child, and it would take courage for her to ask a favor like that. Eli made a mental note to mention it to Rebekah. He knew she would jump at the chance to pass her talent on to others. "I do not see what is so good about sewing," said Sarah. The 10-year-old had no interest in it. Ruby tried not to give up on this outspoken and somewhat rambunctious daughter. She must learn skills like sewing for her own future. Later, when his sisters and younger brothers left for bed, Eli drew his parents aside. "Have you seen anyone unusual around here?" he asked. His parents stopped and looked at him. "What do you mean unusual?" asked Robert. Eli told them about Rebekah's distressful looks at times when he brought her home from buggy rides. He said she often watched the barn area of the parsonage property. It had been months since she did this, until again recently. "Have you asked her what her fear is?" asked Robert. "I have, and not only that, I have checked around on my own without her knowing it. I have seen nothing, and she will not tell me what she sees or hears." Robert assured his son that they would be aware, but he must find out from Rebekah what she knows. The Stauffers knew Rebekah liked to ride out on her own into the fields. Perhaps someone else knew this and followed her. The closest Englishers lived 4 miles from the first Amish farm in the nearby small town. Perhaps an Englisher had an interest in Eli's betrothed. Before nodding off to sleep that night, Eli vowed to press Rebekah to tell him what was going on. They must be open and honest with one another at all times. Their marriage would be built on trust and communication along with faith in their gut. Otherwise, it would not be a fulfilled one. He shuddered when he realized whatever happened that day of the sing long ago had come back to haunt him as well as Rebekah. Clearly, he saw the same fear in her eyes when he took her home several nights ago. Whoever it was had not given up after all this time. He said a prayer for Rebekah that she would be open to his questions. Most of all, that she would be protected. In the days that followed, Robert announced to his family it was time to begin building a house for Eli and Rebekah. Rebekah was to be baptized the following Sunday, and news of the engagement would be announced. Though everyone was aware the 2 were engaged to be married, it had not been officially published. The Stauffer brothers and Jacob Byler gathered men in the community to begin the project. Everyone had their harvests in and hay stored securely in barns. Bales that did not fit into barns were covered and left in fields. The women gathered the last of the garden produces and canned until food was stored for the winter months ahead. Meat hung in smokehouses. Fish caught from the river were salted down and stored there as well. Robert and Eli knew it was time to get the basics of the home finished before harsh weather set in. Once that part was completed, they could work inside. The day everyone arrived at the edge of the Stauffer property, Rebekah was excited about the prospects of her future home with Eli. Food began to arrive, and the women spread it in the large kitchen, and young boys set up tables inside and out. It was a crisp, late fall day, and the sun shone brightly. When the wind picked up, sweaters and shawls were needed for warmth. Steaming plates of food were placed before the men first. They looked at the handiwork of the structure, and all were satisfied at how well things were going. "It is so gut. You and Robert have given Eli the 10 acres from your farm," said Clara Stoltzfus to her lifelong friend. Ruby smiled and said they saved small acreages for each child when their marriage days arrived. Then she shook her head with worry. "What is it, Ruby?" asked Clara. "I know it is not right that I worry. It is just that one of my boys will leave soon for his Rumspringa." Ruby smiled at her friend. "Of course I know that your Ezekiel will be doing the same." Clara nodded her head. She understood the worry of a mother who let her child go into the world of the Englishers. Both mothers knew some chose to take up the life of the Englisher and did not return to their Amish communities and families. Clara suggested they take a moment to bow their heads in prayer for their children. Ruby agreed, and together they whispered prayers. "It is amazing how much peace comes with prayer," said Ruby. Her friend nodded in agreement. "Now let us get desserts out to those men so they can finish Rebekah's and Eli's home," said Ruby. Just before darkness fell, Eli and Rebekah walked into the shell of their future home and marveled at the work their community had done for them. The rooms were portioned off, and fine oak doors were hinged for each room. They talked of paint colors and other finishing touches they would do together during the winter months. Eli then pulled Rebekah to him. "Rebekah, do you believe that we should be open and honest with one another in all things?" said Eli. "Yes, of course I do, Eli." His question caused her to wonder if he had something hidden to tell her. "Then I must ask you to tell me what it is that frightens you at times. I see you look toward your barn area when I bring you back from our buggy rides. Is there someone who is bothering you?" Rebekah turned slightly from him until he took her chin in his hand and turned her head to face him. "I really do not know what is going on," she said. Rebekah told him of the day of the sing so long ago. "I was sure I heard someone in the barn. At first I thought you were teasing me, or Jacob. When you came in and told me Jacob and Nancy were waiting for me to come back, I knew it was none of you. I looked around and saw nothing. No hay sifted from the loft as if someone moved around up there. Perhaps it was Ezekiel. We both know what a tease he can be." Rebekah shook her head. "Ezekiel came in soon after you did. After that day, I did not have that feeling again until recently. The night you brought me home I saw movement but could not discern the figure. He slipped around the back of the barn. The moonlight caught him at the last minute. Did the figure resemble anyone in our community you can think of?" "No, I have thought hard and came up with no one." Eli told her how he had searched around the property on his own. He found nothing, but he assured her he believed her. "The next time you see anything or feel anyone is watching you, promise me you will tell your father and also me. We will get to the bottom of it." Rebekah breathed a sigh of relief. "Danke, Eli. I will do that. I'm sure someone is playing pranks on me." Eli walked her home and to the door of the parsonage. He kissed her on her forehead and waited until she was safely inside. Above all, he would get to the bottom of this. His mind flooded with thoughts of who it could be. He recalled several years previous, when a girl in the community had returned from her Rumspringa. An Englisher she met found it hard to let her come back home. He stalked her until finally her father asked the sheriff in town for help. He never came back, though they did not know exactly what happened after they reported it. This could not be the case with Rebekah. She did not last long enough out in the world. She was ready to come home after 3 days. She told Eli and Jacob she did not experience anything that she wanted to stay out there for. They all three agreed they had the same experiences. Chapter 5. Mary. A full year passed, and the second fall of the engagement arrived. Rebekah had not experienced any more incidences of feeling someone watched her. Wedding preparations were well on the way. Eli's and Rebekah's home was finished, inside and out. A chicken coop had been added, and a modest barn for the few animals they would start with. 2 horses would be comfortable in stalls at one end, and cows for milk in stalls at the other end. After this harvest, hay was added to Eli's new barn loft. He was busy taking care of everything, and was anxious to marry Rebekah and settle down. The house had 3 bedrooms, so plenty of room for children to come. The date for the marriage was set for early November. Excitement rose in the community as the women prepared an abundance of food. Nancy and other friends scrubbed the home of the Yoders. Rebekah chose her best friend's home for the ceremony, and the women were eager to get things ready. The day finally arrived. Bishop Stoltzfus took his daughter, the bride-to-be, and her fiancé into his office at the parsonage. As was custom, he counseled them in the seriousness of marriage and what it implied. He questioned them until satisfied both were ready. Then he told one of the preachers the couple was ready for marriage. "I suppose that even though you are bishop, you will remain here with me," said Claire. The twinkle in her eye told him she accepted the custom of parents, not usually at the ceremony itself. Several preachers from nearby communities would be there, and one would marry their daughter to Eli Stauffer. The ceremony began with singing. The 3 preachers in turn spoke to the gathering. They asked older members of the church to speak of the blessings of marriage as well. That was followed by more singing until, after 2 hours passed, Eli and Rebekah were united in marriage. Clara and Daniel arrived to enjoy the sumptuous layout of food and to congratulate their daughter and new son-in-law. Jacob spent his time organizing the men in seating arrangements. Then he and Nancy led the couple to a corner table where they joined the bridesmaids and groomsmen, whose main job was to keep things running smoothly for the couple. The feast consisted of every kind of meat from the community, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, rice, and heavy gravy. Baskets of rolls were passed down the tables, and women served those who chose to eat outside at the tables lined up in the yard. After the meal, singing and game-playing lasted until Jacob pointed out to Eli that it was just about 3 o'clock. This was the signal for the couple to make their way around the tables and thank the guests for coming. At each table, Rebekah deposited candies from the basket prepared by Nancy. Then they returned to their table, and the bride sliced pieces of cake that were then given to best friends throughout the room. The happy occasion continued until it was time to eat again in the early evening. Turkey, chicken, and fish were served along with more side dishes. Desserts of lemon pie and apple cakes were eaten. When 9 o'clock arrived, the older guests left the celebrations, and the young people stayed for games and more singing until the early morning hours. During most of the long day, Eli and Rebekah had eyes only for each other. They enjoyed everything about their special day, but at the end of it, fatigue set in. A room was provided in the parsonage for them for their wedding night. It was Rebekah's room, and her mother and Nancy had prepared it for them. There was no question in Rebekah's mind that she had chosen the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Eli's stability that she once thought boring was exactly what gave her most comfort, and by the next night, they would be in their own home, ready to begin a lifetime together. When they awoke the next morning, they pitched in and helped clean up all remnants of the celebration the day before. Though all did not retire until the early morning hours, their friends came back eager to help with the cleanup. In short order, things were back, as if nothing unusual had happened. Eli then helped his father-in-law with minor chores in the barn. Rebekah cooked dinner alongside her mother. "You and Dad were right about how important my baptism was. It has changed so many things for me," said Rebekah. "Eli is a gut man and so caring." Claire smiled at her daughter. She silently thanked God that Rebekah found her way. The first weeks in their new home brought an immense pleasure to the couple. Their families brought gifts of furniture in. Eli built some pieces as well. He was very adept at constructing simple furnishings. Jacob waited until later to visit the couple. In the afternoon, he knocked on the door, and a radiant Rebekah caused him to catch his breath. "You look happy," said Jacob. "I guess Eli is being good to you." "Come on in, Jacob," said Rebekah. Her melodious laugh caught at him again. Eli came from the kitchen with a cup of coffee in his hand. "How about a cup of cafe, Jacob?" he offered. All three sat at the kitchen table and spoke of the cold winter that began to hit harder than usual. Christmas was nearing, and once the holidays were over, Eli and Rebekah would take time to visit friends and family. "We are hoping the weather lets up some after the Christmas season," said Rebekah. "We will start our journey to visit everyone then." "I hope that is the case, too," said Jacob. He glanced out the window to see snow coming down. "You do not want slick roads when you go." Eli knew winters could be harsh. They had been lucky that in the past 2 years the snows regularly were interrupted with sunny days. The cold winds blew hard, but it wasn't hard to get to the stores as needed and travel roads throughout the Amish community. Jacob assured the couple that when the time for their journey arrived, he would take care of their animals for them. The three sat laughing and joking as if still children. Eli followed Jacob outside to his horse when he was ready to leave. "Jacob, I thank you for everything you have done for Rebekah and me." "Have you found a girl for yourself?" He rested his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I cannot tell you how satisfying married life is. Rebekah is so giving of herself. She is happy with whatever I do, and we are very content. I want that for you also. I have not found anyone to love as deeply as you and Rebekah do. Nancy Yoder is still after me, and I like her a lot. We have been friends for a long time, but I do not find myself in love with her. The time will come for you. I will pray you find the happiness I have found." Jacob thanked him and got on his horse. He waved as he rode away. It was almost better had he not come to see how his friends were getting along, he thought. It just puts an ache in my heart again. Jacob knew envy was not the way of his beliefs, but it was hard not to envy Eli's and Rebekah's happiness together. He forced thoughts of jealousy down and said a prayer for strength of mind and character for himself. He thanked his God for his blessings toward his best friend and his wife. Christmas Day was spent between the Stauffer and the Stoltzfus households. Small gifts were exchanged, and food remained out all day long. In the afternoon, close neighbors arrived to visit. That evening at bedtime, Eli presented Rebekah with a new sewing kit. It contained many hues of muted colors she could use when making their clothing. Needles of every size were packaged on the right side. "Lift the top part off," said Eli. His eyes sparkled like a child's with anticipation. "Eli, How beautiful these threads are! They are perfect for quilting, said Rebekah. Different colors of threads were beneath the top layer. She leaned toward him and kissed him. Then she handed him a small box. "Where did you find so many different nail sizes as this?" he asked. She knew he mentioned a while back he never had the right size of nail when he wanted it. "This will take care of my dilemma when I am trying to build a piece of furniture." Word spread, and he had begun to take orders from neighbors for his craftsmanship. Rebekah then handed him something wrapped in tissue paper. He opened it and unfolded a large hand-stitched handkerchief. Without looking, he knew each stitch was perfect. "It will look nice for Sunday services," she said. Their eyes glowed with love for one another. Eli took her hand, and together they bowed their heads in prayer of thanks for their first Christmas together. The days that followed were ones of continuing celebrations with family and friends. The snows began to come on a daily basis, and after a week, those who could opted to trudge through the snow on foot to neighbors' homes. Less visiting ensued than usual at this time of year. Due to the harsh winds and blowing snow, Eli stacked wood inside the small back entrance to their home so it would be dry when needed for the stove. He rode to the general store and stocked up on more flour and basic needs so Rebekah would have enough to use through the winter. "With the way the weather is this year, we may have to put our journey off a week or two yet," said Eli. "I am not sure we could make it through this deep snow that keeps piling up. It was hard coming through it today." Rebekah agreed with him. She looked out the window at the relentless clouds that continued to open up and dump more heavy flakes onto the already covered ground. Eli strung a long rope from the back porch to the henhouse and from there to the barn. He told Rebekah to use it for guidance when she gathered eggs. Sometimes the wind blew so hard they could not see any of the outbuildings at all. She promised she would be careful and made him promise to do the same. Rebekah spent her days cleaning house, cooking, and most of all, sewing. She was working on quilts, and one in particular. Eli used one bedroom that had no furniture in it yet for a small workshop. They worked in contentment. Chapter 6. Safe in his arms. One evening when he reached for his Bible, Eli glanced at an unfinished quilt of Rebekah's. The colors in it were paler than the other ones she made. Light pinks, blues, and a pale yellow swirled through it. He picked it up, and her eyes followed his motions. "This one is smaller than the others. What will it be for?" He fingered it. "It is too small for our bed." A slight flush crept into Rebekah's face. "It will be for our bauble when early summer comes." Eli looked startled, and then recognition of what she said hit him. He hugged her tightly, and they laughed together. He picked up the Bible and chose the passage of Matthew 19:13. 15. "Then were there brought unto him little children, that he should put his hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, Suffer little children and forbid them not to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them and departed thence. They bowed their heads in prayer and thanked their God for his blessings." The winter proved too harsh for visiting as planned, but Rebekah grew more content as each day passed. One of her greatest joys was to serve Eli. No matter what she did, he was very appreciative of her actions toward him. Both of them looked forward to the new arrival. Rebekah began to sew clothing for the child to come. On rare days when the weather cleared, she often walked across to her parents' home. The struggles that she endured through the snowdrifts were worthwhile. Her talks with Clara were missed during the long winter, and when she told her of the child she carried, Clara's eyes lit up. "I am so happy for you and Eli, Doctor. When your father comes in, I will tell him the gut news." They spent the afternoon baking as in days past. Rebekah glanced out the window. Snow began to fall again. "I wonder if it will stop when spring comes," she said. "I do not know that," said Clara, "but now you must be on your way before it piles up again." She sent her daughter off with a small basket of fresh bread and homemade strawberry jam. Rebekah started for home, a short pasture away. Eli had asked her to be sure and leave the parsonage before more bad weather set in. The sky was bereft of sun, and Rebekah still relished in the feelings of the warmth she'd just left. She pulled her woolen coat tighter and realized she could not button it as easily over her stomach. A smile warmed her more than the heat of her parents' home had. In the distance, she saw Eli walking from their barn. She watched as he stomped the snow off his feet. Then he looked in her direction and walked to meet Rebekah. When he caught up to her, he took her gloved hand in his and helped her along. Neither of them knew someone behind the small grove of fir trees watched them. The person turned in disgust with the knowledge he could not get closer to Rebekah. Eli continued to get in the way. He turned and left the area. Rebekah and Eli enjoyed a hot cup of cocoa together while warming up. Eli added a small log to the stove. When he reached for the fresh bread, Rebekah pushed the jam toward him. "We will not want to eat supper if this keeps up," said Rebekah. They laughed together, and she stood to begin the meal of leftover stew and green beans she emptied from one of her canning jars. The evening turned to night, and it was time for prayers and bed. In the morning, the sun was shining. The road looked as if glass covered it, but Eli mentioned he saw a little melting going on in spots. "Do you think the roads will be all right to go to the general store?" Rebekah asked. "I will go with you unless you want time to yourself," said her husband. When he asked that, Rebekah realized the days of needing space alone no longer existed for her. "No, I would like your company. I want to get some material. I do not need much but enough to finish a short-sleeved shirt for you and something for the bobsleigh." Eli laughed. "You must be sure that spring will arrive if you are sewing short-sleeved shirts for me." His wife had not sewn anything for herself for quite some time. He reminded her to think of that while she was in the store. "Find a nice piece of material for a dress for yourself, or at least a new apron," he said. "You do not do enough for yourself, Rebekah." "I do not need anything for myself," she said. "I have what I want already. I have you and now this new little one inside me." "All right, but remember what I said when we get there." Eli took the warming bricks from the stove and wrapped them in a burlap sack he saved for the buggy. It was enclosed, but the cold winds shot through the thin walls as if they rode outside on a buckboard. He placed them at the feet of his wife and tucked the woolen blanket across her lap and around her legs. Then he hopped in to drive the horses. He hitched too, this time to make the pull easier through the snow. When they got to the store, he tied the animals to the rail and helped his wife down. Eli called a familiar voice. "You too, Rebekah. What brings the two of you out?" Jacob Byler walked across the snow-packed dirt street to greet his friends. 2 horseshoes were in his hand. He told them he had to come to the blacksmith's to get them made. They chatted for a couple of minutes, and then Eli said, "I just remembered that I have a horseshoe over there myself." "Thanks for the reminder, Jacob. I will go back over there with you." Eli was puzzled, but he told Rebekah to go on into the store, and he would be there soon. "What is it?" asked Eli. Jacob should not be surprised his friend knew him well enough to know something was on his mind. "I do not know if you heard this or not, but word is that someone is using barns to spend the nights in around our community. Whoever it is sleeps beneath the hay and is using shelters close to your farm. You may want to be on the look out in case it is someone who means harm." Eli stopped and looked at his friend. He had never told anyone about Rebekah's fears of someone stalking her, except the one time he talked with his parents. He explained it all to Jacob. "We have not seen anything or felt anyone near since before our marriage. We thought whoever it was had given up his pursuit, if that was what he was doing." Jacob voiced concern. "I will be extra vigilant." It could be the same person. He glanced back, expecting Rebekah to have gone inside the store already. Instead, she was blocked by an Englisher who seemed to be having a conversation with her. "Look, Eli, what does that Englisher want with Rebekah?" Eli turned and walked rapidly back toward his wife. Just before he got to the boardwalk, the man turned and ran away. Eli reached for Rebekah. "What did he want?" "I have no idea," she said. "He acted as if he was going to ask for directions or some kind of information. He left quickly when he saw you coming back." They looked for Jacob. Eli saw the back of his friend running down the boardwalk. If Jacob could catch him, the mystery of who the person was would be solved quickly enough. Eli chose to make light of the incident. Rebekah had been relaxed for months and had not mentioned her fears again. She was wrapped up in her new life and filled with happiness at the prospects of the new baby on the way. He had no intentions of disturbing her peace now. They went inside the store. Rebekah fingered the dark blue cotton material and asked for measurements needed from the clerk. She moved to a soft flannel bolt and asked for some to be cut as well. Eli was not far from her as he got needed items for the house and then took a bag of grain to the buggy and tied it onto the back of the carriage. Jacob appeared and told Eli he lost whoever it was. "It has to be the same person everyone suspects is sleeping in their barns," he said. "Why else would he have run like that?" "Exactly whose barns is he using?" "The bishop told my father he knew he had been in his barn." "The bishop keeps just a couple of horses, as you know, and one milk cow." "Anyway, he told Dad he wondered who was causing hay to be disturbed. He has seen no one as of yet. At least we have a description of him, and I hope it is enough. It was hard to look hard at him when he ran. I'm going to visit the sheriff in town and let him know what is going on." When he saw the look of concern in his friend's eyes, he hastened to continue. "Do not worry. I will tell him to not say anything to the bishop about my report. I know most of us want to solve our own problems, but this is getting serious, especially since it could be the same person who has been hanging around for a year or so. I am concerned you will do this without consulting the elders first." Eli paused to think things out. "Do you think the sheriff will keep it private? You know, everyone involved usually has to be consulted before anything serious, as this is taken to the law outside the community." Turmoil showed in Eli's face. "I think you should first consult with the bishop and make sure he agrees. You're the only person I have told about Rebekah's fears, and I do not want to upset her again over it all. She is carrying our first Bopley, and she must be kept from disturbing news." Jacob's eyes lit up. "I did not know this." "Congratulations, Eli. I know you are both excited about this news." "We are at that," said Eli. "Our families know, and now you, but everyone will find out soon enough. You can understand why I think precautions should be taken. Talk with the bishop. Is that the only barn that has been disturbed?" "The Stoltzfus barn and 2 others have been disturbed." On the buggy ride back home, Rebekah brought up the subject of the man. "I think I have seen that man someplace before," she said. "I do not recall where, though I had the feeling he was the man in the shadows of the barn that night you brought me home from a buggy ride." She glanced at her husband. I do not want to worry you, Eli, but I had the feeling I had months ago when I thought someone watched me. I know this sounds crazy to you, but I got that feeling when he approached me outside the store." She described the man to Eli. He tried not to gasp audibly when she told him details of the man's appearance. The portrayal fit someone he knew during his Rumspringa. The young man's name was Richard Blanton. He often spent time at parties with him, and they talked about the Amish way of life. Richard once was Amish and did not return after he ran away from home at age 15. His father was an abusive man according to Richard, and he could no longer take the treatment from him. At the time, Eli expressed sympathy for Richard. Eli's stomach lurched when he thought of a remark Richard made to him about never getting the chance to see what it was like to marry an Amish woman. His tone of voice was not pleasant. When he said that, Eli pulled from all contact with him. Later, Eli heard adverse comments about himself that Richard spread around the group they socialized with. Soon afterwards, Eli gladly returned to the Amish home he felt most comfort in and to his Amish faith. The best part of his return was that eventually Rebekah Stoltzfus fell as deeply in love with him as he was with her. "You are quiet, Eli," said his wife as he helped her from the buggy. She gathered her supplies and helped carry other items to the kitchen. "I was just enjoying the crisp air and wondering when spring planned to make its way back to us," he said. "I will take the bag of grain to the barn and be right back to help you put things in the cupboards." He kissed her on her cheek, still cold from the winter air, and retrieved the bag of feed. He thought about Richard Blanton. It had been several years since he had experienced his time in the world, and specifically with the detestable man. Surely he was far away by now, enjoying his life as an Englisher. This thought did not allow his misgivings to merely evaporate into the winter air. Eli switched thoughts to Rebekah, who waited for him. He thanked his God for sending her into his life when they were very young and now giving her to him as his wife. The baby on the way to them filled him with unspeakable joy. He decided that the most he could do for now, in regard to the mysterious man, was to remain cautious and alert. The more he thought about the conversation with his wife, the more he felt sure it could not have been Richard Blanton. He recalled hearing he had moved on to the western part of America after Eli came home. Jacob watched his friends ride off. He did not miss Rebekah's enhanced beauty now that she was with child. He brushed off envious thoughts and whispered a fervent prayer that Rebekah and Eli would enjoy many years together as their family grew. He knew he would do anything for either of them if called upon to do so. That included finding out the identity of the man who spoke with Rebekah. No Englisher would be allowed to upset her, and he would make sure of that. Whoever he was, Jacob vowed to make sure he left the Amish community in peace, and specifically Rebekah Stoltzfus. He made up his mind to talk with Eli, and they would form a plan. He agreed that it was too early to go to the sheriff with the matter without the Amish leader's consent. That night, Eli and Rebekah slept close together in the security of their love. Nothing kept either from a sound and restful slumber, knowing their God watched over them. The end. Thank you for listening. Here at PureRead, we aim to serve you, our dear readers and listeners, with good, clean Christian stories. You can be assured that any PureRead book you pick up will not only be hugely enjoyable, but free of any objectionable content. We are deeply thankful to you for choosing our books. Your support means that we can continue to provide stories like the one you have just listened to. To browse our range of clean and wholesome titles, go to pureread.com. Please like and subscribe to our channel. That way you'll be the first to hear when new stories arrive here for your enjoyment. God bless you, and thank you again for listening.